Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Threat Hunting in Windows. Are you hunting or being hunted? It's going to be a good one, you guys, today. With SANS faculty fellow and industry recognized security expert, Dr. Eric Cole. You're also joined by BeyondTrust product manager, Jason Silva, who will run us through a BeyondTrust overview and demo towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions via the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording and slides shown here today within 2 business days from now. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Eric to the line, who will jump right into his presentation. And welcome, Eric. Thanks for being here today with BeyondTrust.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. And for our audience, what a way to kick off 2017 to jump right into security. So kudos to you for the first week of the year, starting to get your daily dose of cybersecurity. And what I'd like to do as we kick this off is make a challenge to everybody. Because I think as we enter 2017, there has to be a paradigm shift in security. We have to recognize that compromises are a good thing. And I know when I say that to some executives and security people, they look at me like I'm a little crazy. But those of you that know me, most people look at me like I'm a little crazy anyway, so I'm sort of used to it. But there's a caveat. And the caveat is this: we must accept that we're going to be compromised. We must embrace compromises as long as we catch them in a timely manner and control the damage. This idea that you can go 6 or 7 or 8 months without a compromise is absurd and crazy. I was actually talking to a group of security folks near the end of the year, and one of them was a CISO at a large organization, and we were joking about what the New Year's holds, and he goes, in 2017, my goal is that we have no breaches for the entire year. And I'm sort of looking at him like, you're crazy. Yes, if you don't look at anything, if you ignore the information and the data, maybe you can falsely believe that, but that's absurd. What you should have been saying is, my goal is to catch an adversary a month. My goal is to catch an adversary a week. We need to flip the sides. The defense needs to turn into the offense. We need to start hunting, looking for and finding that adversary, recognizing they are in our network, and the longer we go, the more damage they're going to cause. So here's what I want you to put on your calendar. I want you to go till February 1st, and I want you to put a reminder. If you have not caught any adversaries by February 1st, what I want you to tell yourself, how many did we miss? How many compromises over the last month did we fail to catch and did we fail to detect? Because that's really what's happening. Based on all of the data and the information that's out there, compromises are occurring at a regular basis. So if you're not seeing it, it's not because it's not happening, it's because you're not looking in the right areas. And one of the reasons I love doing this webcast, and I was so excited when BeyondTrust told me about the topic of threat hunting on Windows, is because they have some great tools that we'll actually show you at the end to show you how to do this. So I know a lot of people look at this problem of going into their systems and trying to manually find all these attacks as overwhelming. I had one person tell me, Eric, I agree in the importance of threat hunting, but I feel like it's almost like looking for that needle in the haystack. There's just too much information out there for me to be able to go through it. Well, the trick is automate as much as possible. Use the great tools from BeyondTrust to find the anomalies, find the outliers, find the unusual activity, and then you only have to focus in on those areas. So it's really the balancing of getting the right tools for the right jobs to give you the proper visibility into what's happening in your environment. And to me, that's the cybersecurity word of 2017. Any of us that have worked in security for a long time, we probably know every year there's a new buzzword, right? We had APT, we had big data. Last year was the threat hunting. We had these terms. To me, the term of this year is visibility. Do you have the proper visibility into your organization to see what is happening, to identify anomalous activity, and to prevent and control the damage that's being caused by the adversary? That's how I describe security to executives and CISOs. That's really what our job is, to get the proper visibility so we can respond early to control and minimize the amount of damage that's out there and happening in our environment. So what we're looking for with threat hunting is very similar to what a doctor would do. If you're not feeling good and you go to the doctor, they're going to start looking for problems. They're going to look for things that are unusual. They're going to go in and draw blood. They're going to go in, take your blood pressure, run a battery of tests, and what they're doing there is looking for anything that's unusual or different. So my question is, how well do you know your systems? If I went into your environment and I picked a system, would you be able to tell me if that's an authorized or unauthorized asset? If I went in and took another system and I told you that a service was running on that system, would you be able to tell me if that was an authorized or unauthorized service? If I went in and looked at what runs when your system boots, what are the startup files that get loaded and executed every time you turn on your computer, would you be able to tell me whether that's legitimate or not? And what I find with a lot of folks is they can't answer those questions. They don't know those answers. And my question then is, how in the world are you going to approach security if you don't have the data to compare with? Imagine a doctor that doesn't know what a blood pressure should be. So they take your blood pressure, but if they have no idea what a normal blood pressure is, how are they going to make any determination of whether your blood pressure is high or low? You need the comparative data in order to do that. So in working and doing a lot of threat hunting, what I've really found the key to success, and one of the first things I want you to start doing as you look at this process of controlling damage, actively going after the adversary, is this. You need to have that foundational knowledge. And to me, the key areas are really asset inventory and configuration management. You need to know what your legitimate assets are, and you need to know how they should be configured. And when I talk about configuration, what software is installed, what services are running, what ports are open, what runs every time you boot up your system. So if you notice, it's not a million things. It's just a handful of items, but you need to have that baseline knowledge, because now if you know what is or is not an authorized asset, you can very quickly identify whether it should or should not be in your environment. And the same thing with any configuration changes. Now you can go in, and if all of a sudden you see services change or ports change or new things running on your box or any anomalies in those areas, then all of a sudden you can take action very, very quickly. And the caveat I do want to give as we dig in is, when you do threat hunting, there's really two areas. You have your network-based and your host-based. Because we're really focused on Windows systems and securing those endpoints, we're really talking about host-based hunting in this webcast. So I always bring that up because sometimes at the end people go, are you saying network hunting is not important? No, no, no. We're just saying the critical assets, the data and the information ultimately reside on your hosts or Windows systems. Therefore, we want to look at how we can start tracking and looking for those devices. And once again, I know some of you are saying, okay, Eric, I know you're saying asset inventory and configuration management and ports and services. And that sounds pretty straightforward. But that's pretty hard if we have lots of devices. That's where the balance of automation and humans come into play. And once again, not to steal Beyond Trust thunder, but that's exactly what the Beyond Trust tools do. They give you that visibility. So now you get a nice dashboard, and that dashboard will show you if there's changes, if there's alterations, if there's modifications. So now you just have to set it up, and then the tool will go in and do a lot of the work for you. And that's really our goal of threat hunting, is we want to put as much of the repetitive tasks on a computer, and we want to have the minimal amount of analytical tasks that are done by a human. And a trick, if you're not effectively threat hunting because you have too much data and not enough analysis, your process is broken. You need to change the process. You either need to reduce the scope, you need to get more tools, or you need to better utilize the tools that you have in place. But if you're telling me that your tools are producing 30 hours of data a day and you only have 10 hours of analyst time, I don't know what you call that, but I call that a disaster. Right? That's not going to scale, and that's not going to work. And I just apologize. I'm doing much better, but I got pneumonia over the holidays, so I'm fighting a little bit of a cold. So if you hear a little coughing or a little breathing in there, don't worry about it. I'm alive and I'm doing well there. But that's why I have lots of experience with doctors over the last week or so. But the whole point when we're talking about that threat hunting is we want to take away the advantage from the adversary. We want it that as soon as they get into our network, as soon as they start compromising anything, we have the visibility to take action. So remember, our first thing we want to do is we want to be able to track any new assets that appear in our environment. We want to be able to track any changes in software that's installed, services that are running, or files that start up when we run our system. So that's sort of our starting baseline where we're going in to look for those different anomalies. And the important thing that we have to remember is we really want to get beyond, and I hate even saying it in the year 2017, but I still see a lot of people rely on it. We do need to get beyond signature-based analysis. Right? That's just not going to scale. It's not going to work. It's not going to get the job done because adversaries are constantly changing, altering, and modifying what they do. What we need to go in is look at the actual changes that need to be made to a system. And once again, I'll get a little more fundamental for you. If an adversary is going to break into a system, if an adversary is going to compromise your box, what do they have to do? I would argue that they have to upload files to the system. Well, let's back up. They have to access the system. So they have to authenticate or somehow log or bypass the authentication to get into your system. So we have the authentication data. They then have to upload files to your system. They then have to run a service. They have to make an outbound connection, and they have to survive a reboot. And once again, I know this is a one-way webcast, but if you don't agree with me, shoot me an email. Ecole, E-C-O-L-E at secureanchor.com if I'm missing something, but I've done this for a long time and many, many years and have lots of validation there, and everyone sort of agrees that that's the fundamental pieces. Somebody's going to have to authenticate or get into your system. They're going to have to upload files. They're going to have to run a service. They're going to have to make an outbound connection. And they're going to have to go in and survive a reboot. So why aren't we monitoring every one of those areas? Why aren't you tracking every single access and authentication into the system? Why aren't we looking at software changes? Why aren't we going in and tracking all this activity? So when you really break it down to the things that adversaries are going to do, you don't have to check 800 things. You don't have to check 5. There's really just 5 fundamental things that you have to look for to be able to go in and start doing your threat hunting. Now, yes, when you start getting into a lot of the different details, IOCs, it gets more complicated. But what I want to do is get the foundational things down first. Get the core things that need to be done down first, and you would be amazed of how effective they are at catching and finding compromises in your environment. I often find that with anything, especially in security, people tend to make things a lot more complicated than it really needs to be, and we need to focus on those core areas. And talking about making things a lot more complicated, what I want to really break down is how well are you doing in 2 areas: known threats and unknown threats. Now, here's the cool part. The more we know about a threat, the more information and data we have about the threat, the more automation we can perform. The less we know about the threat and the more unknown that threat is, the more human analytics have to be in place. So if you look at the breakdown, you should be tackling in the upper 90 to 95% of known threats just by properly configuring the tools that you have in place within your environment. And then depending on the number of resources and the amount of people you have, the unknowns are anywhere going to be between the 10 to 20 to 30%. But here's the interesting part. Typically, unknown threats, the longer they go, eventually become known. So if you sort of treat the known threats, the automation component, as the catch-all, even if you do miss a few unknowns, you'll eventually catch those threats over time. That's why it always sort of frustrates and puzzles me when you have these organizations that have been compromised for 3 years and they don't catch it. I'm sitting there going, yes, I can maybe give you 6 months if I'm being generous, but after that, you absolutely should be able to start catching that. Now, here's the trick. Report cards. You need to start giving yourself a report card of how you're doing in each of those different areas. If you don't know how well you're doing, how can you come back and tell me whether you are or not catching those attacks? So with the known threats, go in and start looking at your automated tools. How many known threats are you catching on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis? How well are you doing with industry averages? How well are you doing at signatures, binary hashes, attack vectors, all those different things? Because I find a lot of folks don't have any idea where the gaps are in their threat hunting. So you want to make sure that you're going in and always giving yourself that report card of how well are we doing with known, how well are we doing with unknown threats. And to me, I'm a big fan of security metrics. And the reason why I'm a big fan of security metrics is 2 things. One, if you're not measuring, you have no idea how you're doing. I sort of always crack up when I talk to security people and I ask them, how's your security? It's great. It's awesome. It's terrific. What metrics are you using? We don't have any metrics. Then how the bleep, bleep, bleep can you make the statement you're doing good security? That's sort of like you go to the target range and somebody's shooting their bow and arrow or shooting their gun. And they're like, hitting the target. And you look out there going, there's no target. And they go, exactly. I make the target up after I shoot the gun, right? Doesn't work that way. The metrics are the target. So I'm a firm believer is you only get results with what you measure, and metrics are how you measure it. Second, I will tell you right now, because I've been spending a ton of time on building out and developing resources for executives and chief information security officers. This is the year that the executives and the board of directors are going to demand metrics from the security team. Last year was the year they were scared. This year is the year they're going to demand results. So if you're not tracking metrics and you want to survive as a security leader, you need to start embracing metrics very quickly. So two of the metrics that I love when it comes to threat hunting, and I'm not saying these are the only ones, I just find them to be very, very effective, are dwell time and lateral movement. What we're really looking at is how long is the adversary in your environment before you catch them. Lateral movement is how much damage are they causing to your organization. Now, if you do those metrics correctly, both of those metrics should be getting lower and lower over time. Every time there's a new incident, in a perfect world, you should see that dwell time reduce. Okay, it used to be 4 months, now it's 3 months, now it's 2 months. The amount of damage, it used to be 30 systems. Now it's 27 systems, now it's 25 systems, now it's 20 systems. So now you can go in and see if what you're doing is working. And let me help you out. If those metrics are not going down, what you're doing is not working, right? Another organization that was telling me that they have an amazingly effective threat hunting program, and it works so well and it's so great. And I tracked their metrics last year, and over a 12-month period, the dwell time increased by 10% every quarter. And I'm going, I think you need some new strategies, right? It's not working the way you think it's working. They thought it was successful because they were catching attacks. The problem is they were not catching them in an efficient manner, and they weren't improving their processes over time. And therefore, because they didn't have metrics, they failed to recognize that there was a major problem in how they were performing those activities. Now, any of you who have ever heard any of my presentations, when I give you rules or metrics or approaches, my one request to you is this. If you have something better, by all means use it. But if you don't have something better, don't say mine's stupid unless you have something better. I teach in a class, and I said my two favorite metrics are dwell time and lateral movement. And the student's like, I don't like them. I said, okay, which ones do you have that are better? I don't have any. Then shut up and use mine. Because you got to have metrics in place. So if you don't like mine because you have better ones, cool. But if you don't like mine because you just don't like mine, tough. Pick them until you find something better. Use it as a way to drive additional focus there. But you got to have metrics in place. So when we're looking at what are some of the key metrics, I told you two of my favorite is going to go in and reduce the dwell time, reduce the lateral movement. Now, yes, I do agree that less breaches is something good, but in my opinion, it's not attainable. And the reason is it has variables that you don't control. You can't control the business that you're in. You can't control how many attacks are coming your way. So I have seen cases where just based on environmental circumstances and new business product lines and political environments, all of a sudden a company is targeted now by 15 organized crime units when in the past it was only 2 or 3. So actually the number of breaches increased, and it had nothing to do with their security at all. Now, yes, if you want to go in and you want to calculate the number of attempted attacks versus the number of breaches and create a ratio against that, then yes, you can then use that breaches there. But the reason I put fewer actual breaches as both the first and last bullet is sort of a warning to you, is make sure that when you're doing hunting, the metrics that you're picking are things that you have control over. I control how long it takes me to find an adversary in my environment. I control how many systems I'm going to allow them to break into. I don't control who's going to target me and who's going to try to break in. So just make sure that when you're picking your metrics, you're very smart about them, and they're actually metrics that you can actually control to show an overall measurable improvement. Now, in doing hunting for a while, sort of some of the key skills, and I've mentioned a few of these, but really want to drive them home, is you have to balance automation and humans. Unless you have a ridiculously large team, you can't be pure manual in your hunting. And unless you're only looking for really, really basic attacks, you can't be 100% automated. So you really want to go in, and here's how we set up threat hunting. The first question I'll ask is, how many manual hours do you have to do analysis on a daily basis? Do you have 3 hours? Do you have 30 hours? What are the number of people? What are the people hours that you have? Once I know how many hours you have to do the analysis, I'm now going to purposely tune your tools to only produce that amount of output. Now there's a little issue here I want to make sure we address. If your tool is tuned to catch everything, so I'm tuning my tools to catch every possible thing that's an anomaly or going wrong on my network, it most likely will produce 300 hours of analytics a day. Well, if you only have 10, you're basically going to catch nothing. So when I go in and say, I'm going to overtune your tools, so now it's only going to produce 10 hours of analytics, not 300, what am I really saying? You're going to miss some things. You're going to miss some things that are important. So I have some people sometimes criticize this methodology saying, but Eric, by doing this, you're missing stuff and you're only going to catch 20% of the attacks. And the answer is yes, but here's the cool part. With your old solution, where your tools are catching everything, but you don't have enough humans to respond, you're catching 0. So which would you rather, catch 0 or catch 20? And the trick is with the prioritization, I'm catching the 20 most critical attacks that are happening, and then I'm going to use that to drive and get additional resources and additional money, so then I can continue to grow my threat hunting to be bigger and bigger and bigger. The other area is I'll sometimes have folks go, Eric, I hear what you're saying when we talk about the asset inventory, the configuration management, all these other things, but we just have way too big an environment. We have 3,000 offices with hundreds of thousands of devices everywhere, and we just can't do this. Question, are all of your devices equal in importance? Let me ask it another way. What is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? What is the difference between a major compromise that's basically going to be all over the news and huge reputational impact versus a minor breach that nobody really worries about? You got the answer? Well, I'm going to tell you. The data that was compromised. The difference between a major breach and a minor breach ultimately comes down to the data that was compromised or accessed by the adversary. So if we now go in, we don't have to try to secure and lock down 300,000 devices. Here's my question. Do you think you can do threat hunting on 50 boxes. Do you think if you have the proper tools, and if you don't have the proper tools, you better stay on in 5 minutes, because we're going to give you the proper tools from Beyond Trust for doing this. But once you have those proper tools, do you think your team can manage data for 50 systems? I do. It's only 50. So here's what you do. Prioritize. What is the most critical data in your environment, and what are the 50 systems that support that business process? And then just monitor those 50. Once you get that down and you're a pro and it's working great and you have some more time, what are the next 50 most critical systems? So don't take this all or nothing approach where you have to hunt your entire environment. It's crazy. What is the critical data? What are the business processes that support that critical data? And what are the 40 or 50 servers that store and access it, and focus on that? So by taking this prioritized approach, now we have an easy, scalable way to be able to roll out threat hunting in our environment. Because now we're focusing on the most damaging and most critical attacks. Now, yes, there might be some other attacks that you're missing, but at least you're catching the ones that are causing the most damage and the most issues. So now as I sort of wrap up my portion and get ready to introduce Beyond Trust, the question I have for you, are you confident in the visibility that you have? Do you honestly believe that you have the proper visibility into your environment? If somebody broke into a server, started copying critical information, and exfiltrating it out of your organization, do you have the visibility to be able to see that, respond that, and catch that? Now, I'm going to help you answer that question. When was the last time you detected an incident or a breach within your organization? If it's more than 3 or 4 months ago, I'm going to argue you don't have the proper visibility. Because if you had the proper visibility, you would have a lot more insight, and you would see that there's a lot more of these attacks that are occurring on a regular basis against your organization. Now, here's the other real question. What data do you need to have that visibility? If you needed to be able to catch a compromised system and control the information leakage, what information do you need? Well, I would argue, based on what we've been discussing for the last 30 minutes, that you need visibility into what's happening on that computer. You need visibility into authentication anomalies. You need visibility into changes in services. You need visibility into applications that are running. You need visibility into the ports that are open or closed, and you need visibility into the amount of data that's being accessed on those systems. So if your current tools are not giving you that visibility, then you probably need new tools. You need some new ways of getting that information. But ultimately, when you go into 2017 and you're purchasing or buying new solutions, every solution you buy in cybersecurity should be driven by what additional visibility does this give me, and how is this visibility going to help me better control, protect, and minimize the damage that's being caused in my environment. And these slides, I'll make them available. I have my contact information on the next slide. If you shoot me an email, I'd be happy to send these to you. So I'm not going to read every one of these bullets to you. But some of the key things I just want to leave you with as we go in is, first, what are the 2 or 3 metrics you're going to start tracking? Starting right now, January 4th, 2017, what are going to be the metrics that you're using? And if you need some time to think about it, great. You're not allowed to go to sleep tonight until you identify those metrics. And I know now you're going to hate me, because now you're going to be in bed going to sleep and you're going to hear my annoying voice. you must have your metrics. Now, I make it easy for you. Pick dwell time and lateral movement and have a good night's sleep, right? Trust me, those are probably two of the best ones out there. Also, write a list of what is the visibility you need. Look at the tools you have and do a gap analysis. What is the gap between what you currently have and what you need, and what are going to be those additional solutions that are going to get you there? Finally, how do you build a baseline with automatic alerting? How can you get a baseline of your critical systems that can go in and start alerting and finding that unusual activity? And then my final thought before we hand it over from a solution perspective is, if by February 1st you have not found any indication of any compromises or any adversaries in your environment, you should be worried. You should be concerned, and you need to get more aggressive on the threat hunting. So I hope this was beneficial. And please, if you need any more information or details, please, by all means, send me an email. I'm actually doing some social media right now on Twitter on this topic of threat hunting. So I'd love for you to join me in the discussion. And now, from my perspective, probably the most important part of the presentation is now the solution. I get the fun part. I get to go in and tell you about problems and tell you about what to do. But if we don't actually give you a solution, then we really haven't done our jobs. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the great folks at Beyond Trust, where they'll now give you solutions for giving you the visibility you need to find the adversary.
All right. Thank you so much. And Eric, since you might still be on, just give me a peace of mind. You should be seeing a screen that says or reads Beyond Insight.
Yes, we have a nice chart where we have some red, pink, and yellow graphs at the top.
Yeah, perfect. We're not going to talk about that part at all, though. All right. So I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So for everybody else, normally when we do these kind of sessions, we have somebody come on, and it's always fantastic, and this one is no different. I love, even myself, learning what I can from these kind of things. And they often relate to some particular product that Beyond Trust covers. This one's a little bit different. This one's a little more of a broad brush because it talks about different aspects of security, and really, when you have all these tools, you need to be able to report on them. That's why I kind of started here. What you're looking at is a sort of a reporting hub for about 7 or 8 different products that Beyond Trust offers. I am going to show a little bit about PowerBroker for Windows. That's the piece that I'm most focused on, the least privileged products for Windows and Mac. We also have the same sort of products for Unix and Linux, as well as password management and vulnerability scanning. Now, for the purposes of this, the two biggest things that we see with the modern day breaches is it comes down to overprivileged users and vulnerable software. If we can eliminate those two things, we actually get pretty far in life. Obviously, like I said, if the user's rights themselves don't have administrative access, there's a lot of things that simply can't even happen, even if you do get what we consider malicious software onto these boxes that are trying to infiltrate and really extract that data out. If those types of applications can't run, then we're in a really good position. The problem becomes, of course, if those can't run, perhaps other things can't run either, the things that should be running. We need to tie the security that we're applying down to a group of users or even an individual user to the role they have in the company. That's really where PowerBroker Windows comes in. The other side of it is a little more obvious. We have a tool that does vulnerability scanning. Send out the scan and come back with the sort of the issues, around configuration of the systems themselves, or of course the applications, the DLLs, the things that are on the system themselves. Are they known to be vulnerable? And even more importantly, maybe perhaps more importantly, do those vulnerabilities, do they have a known exploit involved with them? The nice thing is that just with PowerBroker for Windows itself, it actually has a tie-in to the vulnerability data as part of its solution. So you wouldn't need to sort of purchase both of these things. One will get you a long way of the way there, depending on what your first approach is. So I do want to show a little bit on this PowerBroker for Windows piece. I'm going to jump over to a different system here. So this is just a Windows 8 system. It could be 7, it could be 10, doesn't matter. But on this box, I'm a standard user. Remember, one of the things I need to make sure of is that the users themselves don't have more permissions and privileges than they really need. We always hear it, but I need to be an admin. It comes from people in HR, people in sales, developers. It doesn't much matter. We hear from anybody in the organization. That's the one common front the users have against us, I guess. But they really don't, right? What they actually need is access and the permissions to run the applications that are involved in their day-to-day routine. And on the off chance that they do need to run something that's sort of an edge case, we can accommodate for that as well. But as the simplest example, something like data sources, it's fired up just fine. But when I think something else within this product, I find out I don't have the rights to do it. Well, the beauty here is that's just an application. It's a process. That process itself has certain rights. It actually has the same rights as the user that launched it. I'm going to change that up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to allow that process to launch still as that same standard logged on user, but the process itself will be given the rights it needs to run properly. And in my example of data sources, a real simple application, I run that one because everybody knows what it is, but it doesn't much matter what the app is. It's an application on the system that needs to launch. This is sort of one of the ways to manage this PowerBroker for Windows software, this least privilege tool. Again, happens to be for Windows, but we have it for Mac, have it for Unix and Linux, doesn't matter. This rule simply says, look, if that launches, that being application X, I want you to do something to it. Do I want you to allow the permissions for the application to give it what it needs to run right? Do I want you to deny it? We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But in some way, I set the action. And then this one here, like I said, I want this application to run. I give the app, not the user, the rights it needs, and same rights that the built-in administrators group has. I can use other groups too. This one, of course, is the most common. So with that rule now in place, or now live, I come over, and this, I was using group policy there. If you noticed, I was using group policy to manage PBW in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and manually run an update of policy, but it would run on its own, of course. There are two other ways to actually manage PowerBroker for Windows. One being completely out of AD, sort of a web services model, and one that's going to hit the market here any minute now. If you happen to use EPO, you can use McAfee's EPO to hold these rules and let the clients come in and get it from there instead of getting it from AD. When I run this application again, the difference is it works. I'm still the same user. I still have the same standard user rights. That same user ran this application. The difference now is that with the PowerBroker Windows rule in place, the app has been granted the rights at the token level for what it needed, but the identity is the same. So if this could be an installation, it could be an ActiveX control that needs to install. For those financial companies that might be on the line that use Bloomberg, every month that thing needs to update. If it's not allowed to check if an update is needed, it won't run. So we need to be able to allow the updaters to work as well. A lot of these rules are sort of built in as standard rules that you can just sort of cherry pick which ones you want. Other ones, it's actually quite simple to build up on. I'll show you an example of that as well, and that's when we get into some of the reporting as well. This application here is just an application on the box. It requires administrative access. This one's a little different in that it won't even fire up at all unless I have the rights that are needed. So when I come back over, though, where we started, this Beyond Insight, remember, Beyond Insight comes with whatever product you happen to purchase, whatever your first sort of, I need to handle this piece of my security first, you're going to get Beyond Insight with it. Now, for the PowerBroker Windows, what it does is it allows me to come in and see what's actually been running. So if I want to see, well, show me when UAC prompted, for instance. Right, that Retina application was asking for UAC. There'll be another event here any moment now, but this is one just a little bit earlier, making sure the VMs, of course, were working right. Now, if I wanted this application to run, just like I did with the data sources, I could go in and just tell the software itself, make me the rule that's going to allow this guy to run. Doesn't matter what kind of rule it is. I want some kind of rule. I'll drop it in where I want it to go, whether that be in a denial or an elevation. but it'll work the same way that the data source thing worked. The other problem, though, is what happens when we trust applications that are known to be vulnerable, that do become a threat. I think Eric said it as well. It might have been unknown before, but now it's known. How do you keep up with that? One of the things that PowerBroker Windows does, and this is that tie-in to the vulnerability data, without having to do a full scan, what I can do is tell the software to look out for things that are now a threat, whether that be vulnerable applications. The software is going to constantly scan, well, not scan, I shouldn't say scan because it's not going to get in the way of your current AV scanner, but within the reporting, it's going to detect whether or not a particular application happens to be malware. It runs it through VirusTotal, something real simple, well known as well, but you're going to get that as well. It's going to do it on its own. It's automated, right? This is the idea of taking the man hours or the man out of the man hours kind of piece. Let these software tools take a lot of this load off of you. In this case, these rules simply say, look, if I run a version of Adobe Reader that happens to have a certain threshold of risk, so in this case, if the risk is high or greater, and if the public notification of that vulnerability is 30 days or older, that's when I said, no, deny it. I could be a little bit looser with that. I might say 60, 90, depending on what your personal SLAs are for fixing vulnerable software. And this is what those metrics kind of come down to as well, figuring out what is my threshold, where am I comfortable. And it also may be different on a client machine, like a Windows 10 box, as opposed to your servers. I have a list of rules that target my particular servers in this lab. It doesn't matter how old the vulnerability is. If it's vulnerable, it doesn't run. It's a server. It holds much more critical, sensitive data than do my client machines. So that's all this one did. I didn't have to do anything special. The rest is automated. Now that you've told PowerBroker Windows, I need you to be looking out for what would be vulnerable software, the rest is done. The file that it uses to sort of know what software is vulnerable and not comes down locally to the box on its own. It's just a matter of checking in with Beyond Insight, telling it, oh, by the way, I need this file. Yours is newer than mine. Give me the new one. And then when I go and actually launch an application like Adobe, or I have another similar rule, Firefox, it gets denied. Put a message in front of it. The message can read whatever you want it to. The message can be displayed in whatever language Microsoft understands. That's okay. But in some way, I do want my users to know, hey, that got denied. I meant it to get denied, and maybe some information about it. You want to email me. We're going to be putting in ticketing system integration directly into this message rather than having to go and actually make the ticket for you. But in some way, I want to notify my users. Now, all this information is actually being tracked. The fact that I just try to run an application that I've specifically denied for some reason, well, that becomes a threat. I don't want you to run that application, and yet you're trying. One time, okay, I get it. But now I can start tracking, is the same application running several times on the same box repeatedly? Is it not the user that's actually doing it? So again, we go back to what Beyond Insight is built for. And one of the things, I'm going to log into this. This is a piece of the same reporting, just a different view of the data. You can see here this whole of Beyond Insight is moving towards this HTML5, a little more modern look. But one of the things I like to do is say, okay, well, here's my threat levels, and here's my triggers. There are certain things that software is looking for. And, is the application malware would, of course, be a big one. Is the application vulnerable is another one. If I want to switch applications or which events have actually prompted for vulnerable software, well, I can do that. In this case, it's Firefox. I already knew that. I knew that because I see a PowerBroker Windows event type actually listed for it. That's the event. The event source is actually PowerBroker for Windows. But again, like I mentioned, there are several products that can sort of track this similar data. It may have been Retina. It may have been directly the vulnerability scan that found this particular information. Whatever it may have been, you can actually come over here and get a nice view, a nice picture of, I have all these threats, but what do I care about? Do I really care about untrusted users? What even makes an untrusted user? Well, I've never seen him before, so he's the only box that this user logs into might come up as an untrusted user. So I personally stay away from that one a little bit. But the outliers, it's the only place in the whole system, the whole company. You might have 200 boxes, you might have 200,000 machines, and of all those machines, the only place that this application was seen was on this box. Okay, that could be a little odd. Now we see a range of companies, of course. We see a lot of R&D, heavy engineering companies. Of course, I'm going to see more outliers with those folks because they download everything under the sun. But again, I'm protecting it because I'm only allowing certain things, and if they go out of line and sort of install applications that I didn't previously know about, I might allow it in a couple of different ways. I'm still going to track, I know that that application exists. Now, the other thing I can do is specifically deny applications. It's a nice way to actually go about it. It's actually one of the ways that they to really protect yourself is to only know what's actually allowed to run. Easy enough. The software, I only show some elevation rules, but the software can just as easily deny applications. It's just an action of this actual rule, of this policy. Do you want to elevate? Do you want to deny? You can go somewhere in the middle, too. You can actually force an application to launch as a standard user, even if I log in with administrative access, because obviously there's no magic button. You're not going to snap your fingers and everybody's magically a standard user. It would be a phased approach. But along the way, even with the users being admins, what some folks like to do is make sure that the browsers run as a standard user, even when I log in as an admin. So let's see, we showed a little bit about least privilege, definitely a huge, huge factor in any security model, no matter what paper you read. I'm actually looking at a report from Homeland Security and the FBI, if you read it yourself, on the breach of the DNC. And in there, among other things, two of the biggest factors are patch your stuff and remove unnecessary rights. We can definitely help with those. Some of the other things we don't talk about too much is the password management. And actually, Eric said it too. You're not going to take the whole company at once, but you should know which of your machines or assets within the company are more important than others. If this got breached, it's a huge problem. That's when we talk about segregation of the network itself. And password safe would allow access to those systems in a very brokered way, including, like a bastion host. There's only one machine that's allowed to make a connection, a remote connection to these devices, whether they be Windows, Unix, Linux, doesn't much matter, Macs even. And then as the human being, I validate myself with my own password, with secondary authentication. I'm allowed to get basically to this password safe tool itself, and then from there go to where I need to get. It's recorded, just like PowerBroker Windows has sort of a session monitoring as well. I can see with my own eyes what the user was doing in a privileged session, whatever it might be. It all comes back, like I mentioned, to Beyond Insight. Are there passwords being requested and being denied over and over again? That's a problem. That's a threat that I need to actually look for. I don't need to go out of my way to look for it because these are just standard reports. There's about 300 reports actually that are built into the software to really point out, here's the issues that we're seeing, here's the anomalies, and here's the priority ones. Here's the ones that you should probably go look at right now because there really could be a problem here. All right. So with respect to time, I want to give it back to you, Sarah, if you don't mind. I am going to bring up one quick little slide, I guess.
Thanks, Jason. All right. While he's getting the slide deck back up, let's jump into Q&A. And while we're in Q&A, just one last poll here. Would you like to be contacted for a deeper conversation and even a deeper one-on-one demo with a Beyond Trust security specialist? If you select yes, somebody will be in contact with you to schedule your one-on-one demo and talk further about whatever product that you are interested in and what was shown here today. So let's jump right into Q&A. We had a bunch of questions come in. Eric, if you don't mind jumping on the line, is there a difference in approach to threat hunting when using virtualization or the public cloud?
Great question. Yes and no. In general, if you have permission and access to the information you need, then the general process of threat hunting is the same. So in a lot of cases, whether it's a physical server, a virtualized server, a server out in the cloud, a server at a colo facility, if I have full access to the logs, if I have full access to all the accounts, all the visibility, and I have authorization and permission for doing that, then it's going to be the same general process. Now, the issue is in most cases, those two factors aren't true. Most of the time, if you're at a colo facility or you're at a third party, they don't necessarily give you the full visibility. They might not give you all of the logs, all of the information, and everything that's happening there. So that's where you either have to work with them to perform some of that threat hunting, or you have to get a little more creative and set up your own internal separation of data stores and do application level logging that you control, so now you can get partial visibility into the information that you need in order to find that adversary. But you're typically with a third-party server or virtualization, you just got to get a little more creative because you have limited visibility into what you can look at and what you can analyze.
Okay, I'm closing the poll. Thanks to everybody who selected their option. Another question for you, Eric. How do you identify critical data when the business data owners are not sure?
What is going to put your company out of business? What is going to be the things that would cause your CEO to be fired? So I would go even higher level, because your business owners, but believe it or not, are probably a little too low level. You really need to go up to the CEO, COO, CFO type position and really ask them, what is responsible for the biggest part of our revenue? What is something that if it happened would keep you up at night, would put us out of business? Think much, much more strategic in the questions that you ask at a high level, and you're going to quickly be able to derive what that information is. The problem is if you go too low to managers or directors, they're going to get too caught up on the tactical data itself, and what you're really looking for, even though I say data, you're really looking for the key business processes that make the most money or provide the critical business functions that keep your company running and performing its job function. So I would recommend go a little higher, go a little more strategic.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Eric, what are the differences between services and processes when threat hunting?
I'll give you the real definition. I won't get into my PhD half. There are technically differences from services, processes, daemons, depending on whether we're talking Windows, Unix, the different systems. For the most part, when we're talking about threat hunting, we're looking at what is actively running 24/7 on the box. So what is and I'll use the service or the processes interchangeably, even though anybody who's a college professor's head is exploding right now, but they're basically anything that's running on the system that's performing activity and or can perform damage. So what we're really looking at with threat hunting is somebody's placing code on your box, somebody's running it 24/7 to perform some activity potentially malicious, and then somebody's making sure it starts every time you reboot your system, and then somebody's using that to exfiltrate information out of your box. So for our discussion, we're really just concerned about what's on that box that can cause harm, and we're using that to trigger additional analysis.
All right, thank you. We are going to wrap it up right now. A kind reminder that you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 2 business days from now, and it will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so be on the lookout for that. As a reminder, too, you will see Eric's contact information in the slides. I know I saw a question coming in about that, so that you can reach out to him via those ways, those mediums, when you receive this slide deck. And a big thanks again to Eric and to all who attended live today. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next one next week. It's with Paula Januszkiewicz, so be on the lookout for those email invitations. We hope to see you next week. Everybody take care and goodbye. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.